everyone. It's Amy Milne. Good afternoon and welcome to Textile Talks. I'm the director of the Quilt Alliance, and you can find us at quiltalliance.org and Quilt Alliance on social media. I'd like to take a moment to thank the generous sponsors of Textile Talks. These industry partners have made it possible for this series to be presented free of charge to you. And for the Quilt Alliance, this series has given us a chance to connect regularly with a large, interested, and curious audience. That's you. And we've gained new members as a result. So thank you, sponsors, and thank you, audience members. I am excited to introduce our fourth Textile Talk today, a panel discussion about We Are the Story, a multi-site initiative of quilt exhibitions curated by Dr. Carolyn Mazloomi and presented by the Textile Center and the Women of Color Quilters Network. In just a moment, our moderator, Michelle Flamer, and our panelists, Dr. Carolyn Mazloomi and Karl Reichert, will each introduce themselves and talk about their role in the project. Then Michelle will lead Carolyn and Karl in conversation about We Are the Story, an urgent and ambitious project that came together in only a matter of weeks. I'd like to invite audience members to use the chat box for greetings, comments, and tech questions. And please use the Q&A box only for questions for the panel because we've left time at the end for questions from you. And Michelle, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone. I'm very, very excited and happy to be here. I've been a member of the Women of Color Quilters Network for a number of years, as well as the Quilters Alliance. I'm very excited to engage everyone in this conversation today about this very important, very urgent exhibit, We Are the Story. I really don't want to talk too much longer about myself. This is one of my quilts here that's actually from a few years ago, and it's included in the exhibition. I also have another quilt in this exhibition called Dear White People, which is about Black Lives Matter. I would really just like to have everyone on the panel introduce themselves. So next will be Dr. Carolyn Mazloomi.
I'm Carolyn Mazloomi, and I'm the founder of the Women of Color Quilters Network. And I put together this series of 7 exhibitions, which opened in Minneapolis, and I thought it was a very appropriate place. I could think of no other place to have this exhibition. I was inspired after seeing the murder of George Floyd. I felt that there had to be an exhibition to address police brutality and racism in this country. And I thought there's no better place to have this exhibition than Minneapolis. I called Karl and asked for his help to help me find galleries and spaces that would be interested in exhibiting these works. It's, for me as a curator and historian, I find it very easy, an easy fix to display quilts about the subject of racism and police brutality. Everybody's familiar with quilts, and when you think about quilts, people think of hearth and home, warmth and security, but it's also a good way to tell a story because it's non-threatening. So with needle and cloth, we as quilt makers and I as curator set about telling these stories of how Black Lives Matter and how we're affected by racism and police brutality in this country. And initially, I did. I put this together in 2 weeks, and now in hindsight, it seems like it seems a miracle I got that together. But there are 2 juried exhibitions in this series of 7 that were open to everyone. I was really shocked when I put the call out. I had over 423 entries, but really what got to me, there were entries that came from outside of the United States, from around the world. And the one commonality that people had from outside of the country, they were saying, your story is our story. These were people, especially people of color from Brazil and South Africa, Japan, London, Italy. So the death of George Floyd resonated around the world, and it was a call to action, and it's still a vibrant call. So it's just been a very fulfilling project. And that's the beauty. That's what artists and quilt makers as artists bring to the world. They bring these beautiful statements forth in their work. If I could have the first slide, I just have a few images of quilts that are in the show. This first quilt, I commissioned this quilt from the artist Carolyn Crump. And I asked her to make a quilt that would encompass everything I'm trying to say about the show. And this particular piece is called Cracked Justice. And it's hand painted on whole cloth and machine quilted. And in the sidewalk, you'll see faces, faint faces of victims, African-American victims of police brutality. And then there's a scene that was familiar in Minneapolis when people were marching against police brutality. And as you can see, people are wearing T-shirts that say Black Lives Matter. And you see not only African-American marchers, but you see white marchers as well. Next. This quilt was made by Deanna Tyson from London, and it's called This is History. And Deanna states that, this is her quote, around the world there are still statues that honor slave owners and slave traders and those who committed crimes against humanity. And she finds it a great affront to many people. And in this piece, which is applique, it's a 3-dimensional piece, applique, machine and hand quilted, you'll see that it's set at the Lincoln Memorial with Frederick Douglass and President Obama pulling on the ropes to topple the ghosts of racism. Next. Next slide. This quilt is by Sharon Carey Harlan from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and it's called Bloody Sunday. And this piece represents the 1965 nonviolent march of African Americans for voting rights, where people were trying to march from Selma to Montgomery, and they were brutally beaten back at the beginning of that march at the Pettus Bridge. But what sticks out for me, especially remembering this as a young person, I can remember John Lewis seeing him on television getting beaten and hit over the head and bitten by dogs. And I was young then, and I didn't realize that that was John Lewis until I became an adult and started studying history and read about him, and I had the pleasure of meeting him, and that was a very special moment. But when I think in terms of those marchers and him, and think how many people are willing to put their lives on the line for freedom, those are indeed special human beings that make huge sacrifices in the name of freedom. And that's not to be forgotten. Next piece. This is a very simple and elegant quilt, and it's made by Mary Vanacki from Tucson, Arizona. And it says simply, white silence is violence. When white people don't speak up against violence and police brutality, then they become a part of the problem. And that solves nothing. It just makes matters worse. Next. This quilt is a quilt made by Zoe Lutz from Mounds View, Minnesota, and it celebrates the life of Sandra Bland, who was found hanged in her jail cell in Waller County, Texas. And this is part of one of the exhibitions, Gone But Never Forgotten, which celebrates and remembers those people lost to police brutality. And we certainly, as quilt makers and as artists, we want to call their names and call attention to these people. We want to call attention to police brutality with the hopes that people will understand that this has to end. This has to end. Thank you.
Good afternoon and greetings from Minneapolis. I'm Karl Reichert, the director of Textile Center. I have to say it's an incredible honor for us at Textile Center to be co-presenting this amazing We Are the Story initiative with the Women of Color Quilters Network and with the phenomenal Carolyn Mazloomi as curator. I have to say this is a phenomenal gift for our community. It's one that I think will be talked about for years to come, and we hope that from now until June that we are engaged in meaningful and authentic conversation around these issues of race in America. Textile Center is located right in the heart of the Twin Cities. It's between the two downtowns of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We're on University Avenue near the University of Minnesota, right on the Green Line, the Metro Green Line train. And we do year-round programming for youth and adults, education programming. Our exhibitions are free and open to the public. We have one of the largest circulating libraries dedicated to textiles. And we also offer mid-career fellowships for Minnesota fiber artists through the McKnight Fellowships for Fiber Artists. And we have about 30 member guilds and organizations that are a part of Textile Center, including some amazing quilt guilds that support us, the Minnesota Quilters, Minnesota Contemporary Quilters, the Minneapolis Modern Quilters, and we're really grateful for all that support. Next slide. So this exhibition, when Carolyn and I talked, and I know this will be part of our panel discussion, so I won't go into detail yet about how this all came together, but we are presenting 7 quilt exhibitions throughout the Twin Cities, in Minneapolis particularly. And right now we have 2 shows up at Textile Center. And I'll list the others that are not on exhibit yet, but coming up, because I have images of the ones that are currently exhibited, but we will soon have We Are the Story, the protest series by Penny Mateer of Pittsburgh at the Weissman Art Museum starting on October 15th, and that'll run through March 14th. We will have, we'll be announcing very soon the location for exhibits for Lemercy Frazier of Boston, Freedom Rising, I Am the Story, and Sylvia Hernandez of Brooklyn, New York, Sacred Invocations. So we can go to the next slide. As Carolyn had mentioned, we have solo artists and 2 juried shows, and this show is just installed as of Monday of Dorothy Burge of Chicago. I wish I know how it feels to be free. And this show will be up through December 24th at Textile Center. And I can't even put words to how impactful that is to see quilts, these quilts on exhibit, to see them in person. The photos can never do justice to the brilliant work of all the quilters who are involved in this project. Next slide. The first juried show, Gone But Never Forgotten, Remembering Those Lost to Police Brutality, as Carolyn had referenced, will be up also until December 24th, and it's in our Joan Mondale Gallery. We are open to the public Tuesdays through Saturdays, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. and it's by appointment because of the COVID pandemic. So it's free, open. All we ask is people to make reservations, and they are welcome to come and view these exhibitions. And this show, again, is just absolutely phenomenal. Next slide. And we're very pleased to be partnering with one of our sister organizations in the Twin Cities, the American Swedish Institute, where we who believe in freedom, these quilts by the members of the Women of Color Quilters Network, is on exhibit now through November 1st. And this is the Minnesota premiere of this show, and it is really exciting to have this available at the American Swedish Institute. ASI, as we often call it, is located not very far away from where George Floyd died. And so it's very meaningful to have these quilts on exhibit just blocks away from where that terrible event took place on Memorial Day in May. So it is with really great pleasure to be with you all today and to talk about this initiative. I have to thank Carolyn particularly for turning this around on a phenomenally tight timeline, and to do so with such care and compassion, with all the quilters participating and working with us at Textile Center. It's not easy to pull these all together on such a tight timeline. Oh, I also wanted to mention that the Resist show, the second juried show, will be at Textile Center from March until June. And then we hope to have the other quilts from the Gone But Never Forgotten around the community and community venues. And if fingers crossed about the pandemic and that we can get back to some semblance of normal by springtime, we hope that if quilters are coming to the Twin Cities, we can host them and have them see all these quilts in exhibition. But again, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to the Women of Color Quilters Network, and thank you to all the quilters who are participating in this initiative. It is a true gift to our city.
Okay, I think we're ready now to begin our panel discussion, and I have a few questions. And of course, as Amy Milne had indicated, if you have questions, please put them not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box. Between myself and Emma Parker, we will try to pick those up and have the panelists respond to them. You've already described, both of you, a little bit about how this exhibit came together, but could you just give us a little bit more detail about how the partnership between the Women of Color Quilters Network and the Textile Center actually came to be?
Well, I could start with that. I've been at Textile Center now for almost 6 years, and when I first started at Textile Center, I wanted to form a National Artist Advisory Council, and Carolyn Halliday, who was chair of the council at the time, picked up the phone and called Carolyn Mazloomi because I had read all about her, and we had her books in our library, and we were keeping our fingers crossed that Carolyn would actually be engaged with Textile Center, and she said yes. And I think that was a really wonderful opportunity for us to actually have Carolyn join us on this National Artist Advisory Council. And shortly after she had joined our group, Prince, the artist Prince, had passed away. And we started to think about, how could we pay tribute to Prince? And actually Carolyn worked with us on a juried show that would be up in 1 year's anniversary after his death, and it was commemorating his Purple Rain, a textural tribute to Prince. And Carolyn was really phenomenal in helping us to pull that exhibit together. And of course, through this work over the last 4 years or so, we've come to know Women of Color Quilters Network very well. And Carolyn has been a regular visitor to the Twin Cities, which is a real blessing for us.
Carolyn, do you have anything to add to that? I've not forgotten about the Prince exhibit, but that gives a little bit more context to this.
Well, yes, I would just add, yes, I was invited to become an advisor to the Textile Center. In fact, I had been reading about the Textile Center ever since it came into being. So to be an advisor was really special for me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to throw it back to Karl for a second. Karl, you live in Minneapolis, and I'm just wondering, where were you when you learned of the killing of George Floyd? I'm really curious about, you were in the epicenter of this trauma. Yeah. What was your reaction?
Well, I was actually in northern Minnesota, where I grew up on a dairy farm near the Red Lake Indian Reservation, way up north in Minnesota, visiting my parents on Memorial Weekend. And of course, my mother has the TV on a lot, and we were watching the news, and I saw this episode, this breaking news from Minneapolis, and I couldn't believe my eyes as to what I was seeing. You know, that video that the world has all seen of that tragic killing of George Floyd really had impacted me. I couldn't believe it. And so I was kind of at a loss. It was the holiday weekend, and a good friend of mine who actually serves as our secretary on our board of directors had made a post on Facebook, and he had said, and I'm going to quote this because I think it really kind of sparked this inside of me. He said, "George Floyd lost his life 7 blocks from my home. This could have been me." And Jeff White, our secretary, is African American. He said, "I'm tired of being tired. I have stayed away from uncomfortable issues on social media, but it's my duty to speak up. When will our leadership do what's obviously right? It's time for the Minneapolis police to break down the blue wall of silence and rid themselves of the criminals on their force. How can we trust any of them when they continuously cover up for themselves? I know there are many great police officers out there, but where are your voices?" And when I read that, I mean, I was just so deeply moved by Jeff's words, and know that, you know, how troubling this was for him and his heart. And here he is, one of our leaders on our board of directors. So I wrote to Carolyn shortly after that and said, you know, while here in the serenity of the Northwoods, I couldn't believe what I'm witnessing on television this week, sparked by the cruelty, the inhumanity that cop and his partners murdering George Floyd. Our city has had a racial crisis for years, and I feel that I haven't done enough to fight for change. For those of us who are not Black or brown, we all seem to be scrambling to find the right words, but words alone won't make change. It requires action. And I'm thinking about what action all of us at Textile Center could and should be taking to do our part to make change. We can all throw in the politically correct terms into our DEI language, but where's the action? And that's where Carolyn then responded to that email and said she had an idea for an exhibition.
Well, Carolyn, I know that you had to pull this together like miraculously, very, very quickly. You had amazing challenges. I'm going to ask you, just for everyone's sake, to describe your personal challenges and sacrifice to stand this exhibition just in a matter of weeks. It was a very tight time frame. And as a Black woman, you must have been traumatized by looking at that 8-minute video of Derek Chauvin crushing the life out of George Floyd, dying in the street. Weeks of protest followed all across our nation. And then less than 2 months later, we had 2 icons of the American Civil Rights movement die, John Lewis. And I'm just wondering, how do you, and C.T. Vivian, how do you find the energy, the inner strength to keep going and to respond to the urgency of this moment?
It's difficult, to say the least, okay? It's difficult. When And I find it very hard to talk about the murder of George Floyd. It bothers me as an African American, as a human being, when anybody is murdered by the police. And you keep seeing this over and over and over again, and the inhumanity of it all. I cannot imagine a policeman, one policeman shooting somebody 20 times, 30 times, 41 times. And it's just so inhumane. It's just awful. But seeing that long, excruciating video of George Floyd's death, it was, honestly, it was too much. And the pivotal point for me, when he called out for his mama, it spoke to my soul as a mother. As I said, all of these deaths are difficult, but this man calling for his mother, and I'm the mother of 2 sons, could have been my sons. So when I'm working like this to put something together, like this series of exhibitions, time to me is oblivious. I work 7 days a week. I start at 9 o'clock and my day ends at 4 in the morning, 7 days a week. I'm always determined to get the job done. I want my exhibitions that I curate to be as successful as possible. I want work that really challenges the viewer to rethink things. And I have seen it. Art works. These are small steps with viewers, but every step counts. When you have a viewer who's seen this show and they come in with one attitude and they leave with another, then I feel I've done my job as curator. The artists have done their job as artists because they've inflicted a change and they've touched the soul and spirit of the people that have seen their art. And I've seen this the last 40 years with exhibits. I've seen it. I have folders of letters from viewers that have been to shows, our previous shows over the years, and they're gut-wrenching, but they're about change. And we as artists are change agents. We're agents of change. So again, this is the gift that the quilt maker and the artist gives to the public. And it's a precious gift. It's an important gift. The capacity to move people's spirits and change the way they think. So this is the purpose of this exhibition.
Well, we thank you for that gift, and your work ethic is amazing. Absolutely admirable and amazing. And I do know that you had some really unique challenges because you did all of the photography of the quilts on your own.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I hadn't anticipated that, but my photographer became ill, and I photographed several of the work for my books before. So this was just the added kink in the chain for the events that led to this show. So,
Karl, to continue with what Dr. Mazloomi just said about changing the person who comes to look at these quilts, they come one way and they leave in a different way. Maybe the quilt has touched their heart, it's touched their spirit in some way. What type of healing do you think these quilts actually will bring to not just the people in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but even to those on the outside who may come to visit or see the quilts in a virtual context?
Yeah, I think that, you know, for the viewer, I mean, they are extremely powerful. And I've had a number of people who've been through already who said it is just, it's hard to put words to how you feel when you see these quilts. And you, especially in the Gone But Never Forgotten, you see the names of all those who have been victimized. And we've read about them in the news, and there's some type of way that it just hits you very profoundly and personally. And I think that, you know, art can really help facilitate conversation. And I think for many of us, it's like, how do we talk about this? How do we express our emotions and our response to this? And then how do we feel walking away with a call to action? And I think that's one of the key things with We Are the Story is that, you know, there's a powerful statement in each one of these quilts, but then what's the call to action? What's the change that I'm going to be making personally? What's the change that Textile Center as an organization will be making, you know, as a result of these quilts and the conversation that it's going to be bringing with us inside our staff, with our board, with our members, and then with the community at large. And then I see it just moving outward into the nation and around the world. And we are working to set up virtual exhibitions, so they are available. The 3 shows currently up are available on our website, textilecentermn.org. And there is a link from the homepage to see art, and you'll see virtual exhibitions. And we'll continue to build those out. I mean, this has been, you know, truly a grassroots effort and a very, you know, tight timeline, but the messaging, you know, how it speaks to us individually and the people coming through. And I think that my hope is that people come in with their minds and their hearts open and to really receive the information and what these quilts are really conveying to all of us.
We really can't assume, though, that everyone who sees these quilts will have the same perception.
No.
We're in a very, very divided country.
Mm-hmm.
I think last night's national debate underscored that division. If you weren't aware of it and you watched that debate, I think you would understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, you know, we have protesters that are fighting for the cause of justice. They're labeled as anarchists. So you've curated this exhibition, Dr. Mazloomi, and you've have it at the Textile Center, Karl. Did you experience challenges attracting corporate sponsorship? Has there been any kind of backlash or opinion contrary to what you were doing?
I would like to speak about that. You're right in your comments about people objecting. I get hate mail. I get it all the time, continually. So there are people that are opposed to the show, that are opposed to the messages that the quilts send. So I get hate mail, and it's I've always had a challenge getting sponsors for shows. But this show was somewhat different, I have to say. I want to thank Mark Dunn, who owns Moda Fabrics, because he called me and I was shocked. He said, Carolyn, I want to do something to help. I want to do something about Black Lives Matter. I want to help. So he became a major sponsor. And this was the first time in the 37-year history of the women of color that I gotten a phone call like that. And that was a very brave thing to do. And I appreciate that. As well as eQuilter came forward to sponsor this show. So I just want to give a shout out to Mark Dunn. Thank you. But there will always be people that are opposed for me to do the right thing. And I find that incredible, because when I think back on what's happening, and I'm way over the other side of 73, okay? When I think about where I came from, what I was born into, okay, the Jim Crow segregated South, and how much we've achieved. And now I'm thinking we've just come back. We've just been catapulted back to the 50s. And it's really frightening. I'm at the point where I'm afraid to travel in my car, long distances. I'm afraid. And we've gone back to the days of the green book. We need a green book. I feel like it's open season on Black people. It's difficult sometimes to just maneuver, you know, it's hard. Driving while Black, sleeping while Black. Look at Brianna, you know, shot in her home while she was asleep, you know. Yeah, walking while Black, shopping while Black is dangerous. I feel it's dangerous for us at this time. And that's not a good feeling. And as an American, I shouldn't feel that way. I had someone ask me in a lecture, happened to be in Minneapolis. I was showing some quilts that I had made, and all of these quilts dealt with social and political issues. And this person said, she asked me, well, do you ever do anything about happy topics? Mm-hmm. And I had to say, well, when good things happen to me, I guess I will do that, okay? But you have to walk in my shoes. People say stuff like that, but they can't. I defy anybody, okay, outside of the African-American culture to walk in my shoes for a week. You couldn't take it.
Well, isn't really the pursuit of justice a happy endeavor when you think about it? We're pursuing justice, I think, through these quilts. These quilts are a form of protest, and they're also expressing our desire for equality, our desire for justice. And those should be really happy endeavors. They're not happy.
Well, they are happy endeavors, but in this instance, this person in the audience, you know, she was reflecting my quilts, and on my quilts, and the quilts that I brought, they were weighty topics, okay? And I'm sure for her, being a white person, they were hard to deal with, okay? They were hard to deal with, so.
I understand. I've had the same reaction to my work. It's always social and political, and it's like, oh, lighten up. Well,
seriously,
that's my expression. That's what I'm interested in.
Exactly.
How about you in your surrounding area? Has it been really well received by other institutions in Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Yeah, it's been, I think, you know, Minneapolis is, you know, we're struggling because we realize that there's a lot of systemic racism in our community, and it's really hard because we think of ourselves as such a liberal city, you know, very progressive. You often hear that word about progressives, progressive liberals in Minneapolis, but the truth is there's a lot of systemic racism in our community, and anti-Semitism from years ago. I mean, you know, historians can lay that all out, and it's you know, and I think that, you know, it is important that we really have to call this issue out and to present this front and center in the Twin Cities. The sad thing is that we're dealing with a COVID-19 pandemic, and you know, you know, had it been normal times, I think we could have had, you know, a phenomenal presentation of all the quilts all at one time in community, and really had people traveling to Minneapolis. But with the pandemic, everything has changed so dramatically, you know, how we can respond to it. So we started with the concept of doing it in the fall, and now we've had to move out the timeline just to make sure that we can make it possible for everyone in our community, if they want to see these quilts in person. And in order to do that, we have to do that with physical distancing and, timed entries. And, the American Swedish Institute, like us, has timed entries, and the quilts are all available at no charge to be viewed. But I think in Minneapolis, it's a feeling a bit schizophrenic when you see what's happening, and some of this, tragic, terrible news. That's such a dark side to our city, and also the spirit of hope, and that, we will figure this out. You can look to our Minneapolis City Council, and it's been written about in the New York Times, that there's just, the calls to defund the police department. And there are people who say, well, you can't defund the whole police department. How do we facilitate change? How do we? And I'm hoping that this We Are the Story will help really kind of find a way for us as a community to start having this discussion in a way that, you're right, is polarized, and you have your police union and strong opinions on that end, and we also have people who just don't trust the police at all. And we've had these I think the protests have been quite powerful, really quite amazing the way people came out into the streets. And we're learning as investigations go on that the arson and looting was not really it wasn't the protesters. It was people coming into our community to create the trouble and to wreak the havoc, and that's what makes Minneapolis, I think, is a very sad city right now. A beautiful city, lots of lakes, but we have this situation where we have disparities in our education, and where African-American children are just not having the same level of education or opportunities as white children. And this and it's been a topic for a number of years. But I hope now that it is really, can we take action? We have to figure this out. We have to move forward. And then, of course, we have the pandemic on top of it all, and then the whole issue around masks and social distancing and all of that. So it's complicated, but I do think that's why I say this is it's a strong gift for our community, because I don't think there's going to be an exhibition quite like this one in our community at this very important time. There's going to be some great theater work, music. I know there's going to be a lot of responses, but I'm proud that in fiber art, and especially through these quilts, that we can actually do our part.
Well, before I get to the other questions, this is really something I'm thinking about. Do these quilts simply respond, do you think, to just this moment that we're in right now, this American moment, or do you think they have more of a timeless quality? So if we look at these quilts, say, I don't know, 20, 30 years from now, what do you think?
The quilts are timeless. I often say, and it's a fact, quilts are historic documents. You have people around the world, scholars around the world, that are studying quilts. Quilts give one a glimpse into the timbre of the times for the period in which the quilt was made, what was happening in our country, in our families, in our communities. So you can see a lot in a quilt. Every quilt has purpose. Even the patchwork quilts, the applique quilts, pictorial quilts. When an artist sets down to make a quilt, nothing's by accident. There's always some story attached to that quilt. So 200 years from now, when people are investigating these quilts, they will look at these quilts today and see exactly what was happening in our country at the time. And looking at these quilts, a lot of the topics, this change is slow. It's a slow grind, okay? So I'm sure these will be relevant for decades. But notwithstanding, each quilt is a historic document. It's just like a book. And once it's made, it's here forever. And this is why I document each exhibition as well, because there has to be a written record as well of these quilts and what the artist is trying to say. This becomes a part of the permanent record of the exhibition and the quilt, because once the quilt leaves Minneapolis and it tours. We don't know where that quilt might land, but there must be a record of the quilts. So the records are permanent. Quilts are permanent.
Well, that's one of the questions. Are you going to be producing a catalog of the
There, I'm working on the catalog now. The show was kind of backwards because I had to have the work right away. Mm-hmm. And it was impossible to get a catalog written so quickly. So I'm working on it now. So you should expect it by the first of the year.
And will that include the statements from each quilter?
Of course. I always include the quilter statements because unlike early scholars of quilts, I don't answer for the artist, okay? The artists answer for themselves when they issue the statements about their quilts. I don't interpret what they're trying to say. I ask them. Tell me about what you're saying. Explain to me what that quilt is about, and then I'm going to write it. And I think it's important as a scholar, it's important as a historian to hear what the practitioner has to say, because without it, how can you write true history? I don't believe in interpreting in the interpretation of other people's work without, you have to ask them why they did what they did. So that's my job as historian and writer, to get at the truth and go directly to the artist. And
Karl,
then you have the facts.
Right, the facts. Karl, as the quilts are displayed, are they displayed just with the title, or can the visitor then look at the actual quilt statement? And then the other thing I wanted to ask earlier, we were talking about the reaction that people have to these quilts, and Dr. Mazloomi is talking about, you know, you see the quilts, you come in one frame of mind, you may leave in a different frame of mind. Is there an opportunity for the visitor to leave comments in a gallery book?
Interesting about that. I mean, with COVID-19, we're trying to keep everything sanitized and holding pens, and so I've been thinking about that, and I think what we want to do is to really have a strong online component to ask people to do, an online guest book, and I think that we traditionally always have people write, their observations of an exhibition when they're through. So as for the statements, those are coming. As we know, Carolyn, she worked long hours for these past months. And so as soon as we receive the statements, we will put those into part of the exhibition program as well, and on our virtual exhibition. So, the information is going to keep building and growing as we're putting this together, because again, this is not an exhibition that was planned 2 years ago and we had all this time to get it together. It's coming together very quickly, and we're very mindful of Carolyn's time. And when she told me she had to photograph all the quilts, I was really worried. I said, oh my God, how are you going to get all the, it's 89 or 88 quilts. That's a lot of quilts to photograph. And then my husband, Reynaldo, and I were driving down to Cincinnati to pick up the quilts, and Carolyn says, well, I'm going to leave the door unlocked in case I have collapsed on the floor from photographing all these quilts. So it's coming together, and yes, the intention is that we do want to have these statements available so people can really absorb those as well as the images to see the quilts.
Okay, so that's one of the questions. So there'll be opportunity to see the quilts virtually, and there's also going to be a wonderful opportunity to have a copy of this catalog sometime at the first of the year. Very good. One of the questions, well, there are many. Here's one. Anna writes, she says, as a white artist, she wants to make art that acknowledges the pain of our collective community and challenges the laws that underpin racial injustice. She would like Dr. Mazloomi to speak about what white artists need to know when expressing their ideas without offending or taking over the stage of Black artists. I would just add that I do know that this particular call was not limited to the Women of Color Quilt Network. And I believe the artists represented in this show happen to be quite diverse, globally as well as racially and ethnically.
They are diverse. In fact, at the opening, two of the quilts that I showed that are in the exhibition were made by white quilters. So when in thinking in terms of the participation of other quilt makers from outside of African American culture, I think if you make a statement about something, I'll just use this show as an example. You're making a statement about racism, and if you're sincere in your effort and you're sincere in your motivation, that makes a difference. I meet a lot of artists that are outside of the culture, and you want to be in a show for the sake of being in a show, and you don't have your stuff together, okay, and it's insincere. I have to say, this is one thing about African American people and people of color. You can't come to me with insincere crap, because it's something internally we can see when you're not sincere. I can feel it when you're not sincere. So I think if your motivations are sincere and you want to make a difference and you really have something serious to say and you want to participate, then it becomes real. But if you're coming just to make a piece, just to be in a show, and you aren't sincere in your efforts about the topic, then I have a problem with that. And I will call that out because it's wrong. It's insincere and disingenuous. It's just flat out wrong. And that's not a person that I want to work with.
Understood. There are a number of questions about how you determine which quilts actually will go into the exhibition. Which venues do you send these quilts to? Because this is amazing, multi-layered exhibition.
I know, yeah. As a curator, I think my method of curating is a bit different. Most people in the traditional art world, I guess contemporary too, they look for quilts that are technically superior, the best quality in so far as workmanship. My method is a little bit different. I'm looking for storyline. I'm looking at the visual impact of the quilt. If the quilt doesn't fall apart during the 3-year tour of the show, I'm happy, okay? If it visually gives me the message that I'm looking for, then that's the quilt that I want. Then the technique and workmanship, that's a happy byproduct. I'm looking for storyline. So then you asked about venues, how venues are chosen.
Yes, how you determine which quilts would go to which venue and just coordinating.
Oh, okay, well.
How do you coordinate something this massive?
That's true. This show will travel, and it's too large to travel, and I'm going to have to only accept 50% of the work into the traveling show. So again, I will look for the work that's most impactful and the work that displays the objective of the show as powerfully as possible. So I look for that. And it's going to be difficult, but those decisions have to be made. And that's coming up pretty soon. So yeah.
Is there a demand for this type of exhibition right now? Because what I worry about is losing the moment. Everyone responded to the Floyd murder. We're still
exactly. And
what happens next.
And that's our history, okay? Things come in waves. If there's a lot of interest, and then things kind of peter out. I've had a lot of museums that have called or emailed me about interest in this exhibition. So I would anticipate quite a nice tour, but the tour wouldn't happen for another year and a quarter, okay? So we'll see what the timber of the time says a year and a quarter from now, because heaven knows.
Yeah.
We don't know. I don't know, okay? I just find that these movements come in waves. They come and go. The movements come in waves, but the hate still stays.
That's true. And Karl, you talked about some type of enduring, I guess, result from this exhibition, something that will continue beyond just the four corners of the exhibition. I'm wondering, is there any desire or interest in maybe doing something with the school children in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to maybe have some of this put into their curriculum? Because history matters. Black lives matter and history matters.
Yes. Yeah, Carolyn and I have been talking about that, and we definitely want to create a curriculum and to have this available for Minneapolis school children. And I think, again, that's the next phase. We're going to be setting up Zoom talks with artists. Carolyn has some artists that are lined up for us. We will have those scheduled soon. And so we hope that the Quilt Alliance and the other partner organizations will help us spread the word as those are scheduled. And then we're also looking at our youth programs in the schools and the curriculum that we would develop around these quilts. And so since we have the virtual component, it'll make it ideal for school children right now to see these quilts online. And then I think that as we get through past the holidays into the new year, you know, we'll have the second kind of wave of this exhibition will begin in March. And I think, you know, in the springtime, right now we can't have school buses coming to our facility, but you know, I'm hopeful that we can find ways that school children will be able to see these in the springtime, you know, coronavirus permitting, you know, it's, but I think to be able to see these quilts in person is really important as well. So that's the challenge we have in a pandemic, but the curriculum, yes, I think that's going to be very important.
And I want to add to that, Dr. Denise Campbell, who is a member of the Women of Color Quilters Network, and who also owns a exhibition tour company, is in process now of writing a curriculum for this exhibition. So we will have a curriculum. And that's one thing, especially with the traveling exhibition and with all of our exhibitions, teachers always want a curriculum, so that will be available within the next 8 weeks.
That is wonderful. All right, well, I wish we had another hour or two to continue the conversation, but we're out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Amy Milne, and I thank both of you, Karl and Dr. Mazloomi, for allowing me to be part of this conversation and, you know, just being part of the exhibition. I'm just so deeply honored. Amy.
Oh, thank you all. Michelle, thank you for a wonderful job moderating. And I know you've got a full plate, so I really appreciate your doing it. And Karl, thank you for joining us. I know that this is just the beginning, hopefully, of us working together. So thank you so much. And Carolyn, what can I say? Endless hours of not only this exhibition, but the Women of Color Quilters Network and your contributions to not only the Quilt Alliance, but many other organizations. We thank you so much. And if you would like to see an incredible interview that Carolyn conducted with artist Dinga McCannon, check out Quilters Take a Moment, which is our other virtual endeavor recently. You can find out on qtm2020.org. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being here too.
Thank you.